When I was a kid, my father had a knack for making even the most ordinary evenings feel extraordinary. He would host movie nights with us kids, turning our living room into a mini theater. We'd stay up late, well past our bedtime, watching classics like Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. It felt like a rite of passage, a taste of adulthood wrapped in popcorn and candy. The thrill of being scared combined with the sugar rush left us both exhausted and wired. It was the perfect chaos. My dad was also a prankster. He couldn't resist adding his own brand of mischief to horror movie nights. Sometimes, after the credits rolled and we'd reluctantly gone to bed, he'd sneak into our rooms with a mask or toss a bag of frozen peas under the covers to startle us awake. As kids, we were terrified in the moment, but as an adult, I look back and laugh. His pranks were part of what made those nights unforgettable. But then we moved to a new house. It wasn't anything special, just a regular suburban home, but it marked the end of our horror movie tradition. Between unpacking and settling in, the nights of staying up late with Dad's pranks faded into memory. About a year after we moved in, strange things began to happen. One night, I woke up needing to use the bathroom. As I walked past my brother's bed, I saw his pillow fly out from under his head and land far down the hallway. He didn't stir, and no one else was nearby. Another time, I watched the door to my sister's room slowly creak open, even though everyone was sitting at the dinner table. It was eerie, but at first I chalked it up to drafts or my imagination. Then the incidents became more frequent. Items moved on their own. Doors opened and closed without explanation. My siblings and I started to wonder if our dad was up to his old tricks. He had been known for going to elaborate lengths for a prankster after all. But when we confronted him, he denied everything. His confusion seemed genuine. Our new house had a peculiar feature, a giant wall-sized mirror behind the dining table. The table was a wrap-around bench style, meaning some of us had our backs to the mirror while others could see themselves eating. One night, while we were having dinner, my dad suddenly froze. He stared at the mirror, his face pale. After checking behind him, he turned around to count us. When I asked him what was wrong, he told us that he thought he saw a little girl in the mirror, his voice uneasy. We laughed it off, assuming he was trying to scare us, but a few weeks later it happened to me. I looked up from my plate and saw her, a little girl, translucent and pale, standing behind us. Her features were blurry like fog, and before I could fully focus, she was gone. It was unsettling, but I tried to convince myself that it was a trick of the light. As the weeks passed, the little girl in the mirror became a regular presence. We never saw her clearly. She always vanished the moment we tried to focus, but we felt her watching. Then came the humming and murmuring. It started as faint, muffled sounds, like someone calling our names from the other room. We'd respond, only to find no one there. It was chilling, especially when it happened while we were alone. Desperate for answers, we tried every home remedy we could find. After consulting with people we knew who practiced Wicca and Reiki, we burned sage, sprinkled salt, lit candles, and said prayers, but nothing worked. If anything, the activity seemed to escalate. Items fell off shelves with increased frequency, often accompanied by the sound of a little girl's laughter. But the laughter wasn't always hers, and it wasn't always lighthearted. That's when we started to notice him. The little boy. His presence was different from the girl's. Where she seemed curious and almost innocent, he felt dark, menacing. His murmurs were deeper, his laughter sinister, and unlike the little girl, he didn't just move random objects. He focused on knives, tools, and other dangerous items. One night during dinner, I saw him in the mirror. He was behind me, moving closer. I spun around, expecting him to disappear like the girl always did, but he was still there, his nearly featureless face twisted into a maniacal grin. Then he vanished, and at that exact moment, my knife fell from the table, narrowly missing my foot. By then, even my father was scared, and we decided to move. Packing was bittersweet. We had made friends in the neighborhood, but the house had become unbearable. On the last day, as we loaded the moving truck, I heard the little girl crying. It was faint but unmistakable, a mournful sound that tugged at my heart. Later, as we closed the door, I heard the little boy's laughter. It was triumphant, as if he was proud to have driven us out. Looking back, I often think about the little girl. I wonder if she was trapped, a victim of the boy's malevolence. Did she need our help? Could we have done something to free her? These questions linger unanswered, haunting me. When I was a teenager, my father started to teach me how to fix houses. He became a handyman after being laid off from his job as an engineer and believed I would benefit from learning the same skills he had. Working with my dad was both fun and challenging. Over the summers and on long weekends, he would take me to his job sites where he taught me how to install light fixtures, unclog sinks, and repair damaged walls. He became skilled at being a handyman and decided to take the next step, buying a house to fully remodel with the intention of making a profit. Unable to afford an expensive house, he bought an extremely dilapidated property in a struggling part of town. Despite its condition, he worked hard to build relationships with the neighbors, often bringing them food and offering to pay them to borrow power and water so he could make progress on the project. When I accompanied him, he introduced me to the neighbors, who spoke highly of him and admired his efforts to improve the area. The house my father had purchased had been on the city's list of condemned properties, set to be demolished due to years of abandonment. During one of our visits, a neighbor's tone grew serious, and he decided to share the house's history. He told us about a young man who had fallen into the clutches of a local gang, transforming him from a caring, kind individual into someone violent and dangerous. The man became known for his intimidation tactics and frequent outbursts. Arrested multiple times for domestic violence and assault, he was always released on bail. Eventually, the man began squatting in the house my father had purchased. His presence brought trouble to the neighborhood, loud, chaotic gatherings, and frequent disputes with women who discovered his infidelities. The neighbor went on to describe a night when the man had come home, the kind of late in the night that became early morning, stumbling from his car holding his abdomen with one of his arms as he limped into the house. About 20 minutes later, another car came down the street with seeming hell-bent intent, swerving quickly into the house's driveway. Two men got out of the car and kept themselves low to the ground, making their way to the door of the house and kicking down the door. The neighbor then described a series of fast-paced events, with the two men entering the house and hearing the loud shots of a gun while seeing bright light from the windows near the front door. The two men quickly ran out of the house and drove off into the night. My father hadn't known the house's grim history. He shook his head in quiet reflection, but stayed determined to complete the project. That day, we got to work tearing down drywall and removing old flooring. Hours later, I pulled down a section of wall, revealing a hidden space between the studs. What I saw left me frozen. Behind the drywall was a blood-stained wall, untouched since the night of the man's death. Whoever had tried to restore the house had simply built a new wall over the old one, leaving the grisly evidence behind. I called my dad over and he was just as appalled, but he had no choice. All his money was tied up in this project. Together we removed the blood-stained drywall and flooring, working in silence as the weight of the house's past hung over us. Weeks later, my dad had the idea to let me and my friends stay at the house for my birthday. By then, the house had new drywall, but the floors were still just plywood. I tried to push the memory of the bloodstains out of my mind and agreed. I invited my friends over and we spent the evening eating snacks and playing games. Only one room had a working light fixture, so we decided to camp there, huddled there in a bubble of light while the rest of the house remained pitch black. As the night wore on, the house began to take a different character. The single light cast flickering shadows that seemed to move and twist along the walls. Every creak of the plywood floor sounded amplified. Each groan of the house's structure left a whisper from something unseen. The air felt unnaturally still, heavy with a tension none of us could name. A faint, sour smell lingered, something metallic and unpleasant. I tried to convince myself was just the old house settling. Then we heard it. A loud thud echoed from the room next to ours. It wasn't the kind of noise an old house makes on its own. It was deliberate, sharp, and out of place. We froze, staring at each other in silence. No one wanted to be the first to acknowledge it, but the fear in our eyes said it all. Gathering what courage we could, we decided to investigate. The air in the adjacent room was thicker, heavier, almost suffocating. Our flashlights cast narrow beams of light, revealing nothing but the bare walls and empty space. The room looked untouched, yet it felt profoundly wrong, as if we were intruding where we didn't belong. The shadows here didn't just move, they seemed to shift, almost alive, pulsing in the corners of the room. As we turned to leave, the scratching began. It was faint at first, like fingernails lightly scraping wood. Then it grew louder, more frantic, as if something on the other side of the walls was clawing its way through. The sound surrounded us, echoing from every direction. It wasn't just noise, it was desperate, angry, and relentless. We bolted back to the room with the light, slammed the door behind us even though it couldn't lock. We pressed our backs against it, holding our breaths as the scratching followed us. Moving from the walls to the floor, it grew louder and closer until it was directly behind us, clawing at the plywood as if to break through. Then, it stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the light above us. We stayed frozen, afraid to move or even breathe. The light flickered, casting jagged shadows that seemed to reach for us. I finally mustered the courage to peek through the door. The hallway beyond was dark and still, but the air carried a foul, earthy smell, like rotting vegetation mixed with something metallic. Then I saw it. At the edge of the light, a shadow moved. It wasn't just a trick of the eye, it was deliberate, swaying as it shuffled closer. It was the outline of a man, his movements jerky and unnatural. The smell grew stronger, almost choking me, and I could hear faint, guttural breathing, wet and angry. I couldn't move. My friends were calling my name, but their voices felt distant. The shadow stopped just outside the light's reach, lingering as if deciding what to do next. I blinked, and it was gone. The smell lingered for a moment longer before dissipating. I slammed the door shut and told my friends what I'd seen, but they didn't believe me. They thought I'd rigged the house to scare them. I ended the night early, insisting we finish the celebration at my house instead. We packed up and left, leaving the house and whatever haunted it behind. I never went back to that house, and we heard from the neighbor a few years later that the house had burnt down. He seemed confused about the situation because, according to him, the current owners seemed relieved that the house burnt, as if freeing them from whatever haunted it.